All right. As always, we have another good message. It's obviously been a good day, bright and early today on this Wednesday. Um, we will be reading out of Genesis chapter 16. Genesis chapter 16. And it is a familiar story for most of us that have been in the faith for a while. Um, Genesis chapter 16 is a story of Abram, his wife Sarai, and Hagar. Some of you guys are saying Abram and Sarai. Yeah, that's Abraham and Sarah. Their names, God changed their names later on in life. But at this point, Genesis chapter 16 is just Sarai, and Abram. So let's get into the text. It's not too long, it's only 15 verses. So let's get started. Verse number 1, and I'm reading from I think this is New Living Translation. Yes. Verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "This is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me." Abram replied, "Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, "Hagar, Sarah's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?" Hagar says, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." Then he added, "I will give you more descendants than you can count." Interesting. And the angel also said, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael," which means God hears, "for the Lord has heard your cry of distress." Isn't that wonderful? "This son of yours will be a wild man and untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live open. He will live in open hostility against all his relatives." Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." She also said, "Have I truly seen the one who sees me?" So that well was named Bir Laroy, which means well of the living one who sees me. It can still be found between Kadesh and Bered, however you say that. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. So we have a great story here, a very interesting story, a very common story for Christian Jews and Muslims to hear. Excuse me, I have to blow my nose. A very, very common story for Christians and Jews and Muslims to hear. Uh, it is a story that gets at the faith and tells the backstory of the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim stories. We obviously know that Judaism and Christianity comes from Ishmael, which eventually is the son of Sarah and Abram, and we know that the Muslims, or the Islam, the religion Islam, comes through the birth of Ishmael, which came through Hagar and Abram. So now let's look at the text, or let's go back to the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, I'll give a quick overview. In the previous chapter, God comes to Abram and tells him that he'll have an heir. Now, at this time, Abram and Sarah are quite old. They can't conceive. So Abram starts to use his, rational mind and says, "Hey, I basically can't have a child at this age. I'm older. My wife is older. She's past her menstrual cycle has stopped. She doesn't have the monthly period. So he suggests that, hey, I have a manager, a servant, and he can take over the land, the money, the property, etc., etc. He can take over all those things and move it forward. But the Lord tells Abraham no. He tells Abram no, that he'll have his own heir, and the heir will come through his body, so he'll have a son. This is essentially the conversation in the previous chapter. So now that we get to chapter 16, we see that Abram and Sarai are attempting to have a child. They're trying to conceive, but they can't. They cannot conceive. So they're having a bit of an issue. Sarai concocts a plan and thinks, hey, we have this servant that we got from Egypt. We went down to Egypt when there was a famine, and now we're no longer in Egypt, and we brought this servant from Egypt. How about we use this supple young lady, and we use her, and you lay with her, Abram, and you have a child. We can essentially use her as a surrogate, okay? This is the plan that Sarai is concocting, and Abram agrees with the plan. It's interesting. He doesn't say no to having physical relations with a pretty young woman. Interesting, Abram, okay? So in essence, Sarai and Abram have become impatient. The goal that they want, the dream that they have, is not coming to pass. Now, how do we turn that or look at that in our own personal lives? That's easy to see. We all have dreams or goals that we wish would come to fruition almost instantly, but we have to wait and work at those dreams and goals that God has given us, okay? So I think this story, which happened thousands of years ago, is still current. It's still something we can see that affects our lives today. And that's why the Bible is still relevant in modern times. It's still very, very relevant. The dream that they have does not come to fruition. And they're having basically issues of pregnancy. We all have dreams that don't come to fruition. And there are people all over the world who have trouble getting pregnant. So this is a very, very relevant topic. Now, while they do have a dream or goal that they would like to have and they're impatient, there are some good things that we can look up in our impatience to hit our dream and our goal, in our impatience to obtain our dream and our goal. We can look at the positive things that are happening in life. I think we all probably wish that Sarai and Abram would have looked at the positive things that they had going on in their lives, but we can learn from their mistakes, right? We can learn from their mistakes. So let's look at the positive things that they had going. Number one, they were rich. Two, they were healthy. Three, God was speaking to them and dwelling with them. They had a good relationship with God. Four, they were alive. Five, they had land. And six, they had servants. Let's go over that list again. They were rich, healthy. God was speaking with them and dwelling with them, which is the most important thing. They were alive, they had land, and they had servants. Life wasn't going too bad for them. So I say this to you all, and I say this to myself included. When we are waiting for a dream or a goal to be accomplished, when we are in the process of working on it, look at the positive things you have going on in life too. Right? Sometimes we wait for goals to come to fruition. It takes 6 months. Sometimes it takes a year. Sometimes it takes 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes the things or the visions we have in life take a while, but we can look at the good things we have. Abraham and Sarah had riches. They had health. They had God. They had servants. Hey, all of us, most of us, majority of us are healthy. We're well. We have God in our lives. We have friends, we have family. Life can be so much worse. So make sure you thank God for the things that are going well in life. Make sure you dwell on the things that are going well for you. Next, I want to also take note of the fact that Hagar seems to be used like an object. I don't think Sarai's plan was an act of love. I don't think when Abram agreed to the plan Sarai concocted, I don't think it was an act of love. They used Hagar like an object, okay? Though this was legal, several pagan groups will use this as a practice, right? If a husband and wife can't have a baby, they can't conceive, they use a surrogate. In modern times, we have surrogacy. We typically use artificial insemination nowadays. In those days, thousands of years ago, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the science. So you would have to physically bond, a man would have to physically bond with a female, okay, to have a baby, all right? Um, at this time, Hagar, who was a servant or a slave that they got from Egypt, now becomes Abram's wife, and they are able to conceive because she becomes a surrogate. Hagar's a much younger woman, so they have the ability to conceive. Okay? Now, Hagar is being used like an object, and I'm sure she's fully aware of this taking place. So resentment comes in, right? You have to think she resents this a bit. She's being taken advantage of and she's being used. This is not a loving act, okay? They were not thinking about Hagar's future. They were not thinking about Hagar's health. They were not thinking about her body in a positive way. Hagar is forced to marry an older man that we do not know if she loves. We certainly know he does not love her. Hagar is forced to bear a child. Hagar is forced to become a mother, and she didn't ask for any of this. So she is put in a terrible situation. She's put in a very bad place. And again, she's being used as a surrogate. It's legal, but she's being used as an object. Let's be real here. Sarah and Abraham don't care about her that much. They don't. Now, after harsh punishment and harsh treatment, Hagar runs off into the wilderness. As we saw in verse, let's say, after Hagar becomes Abram's wife, and after they have physical relations, the Bible says in verse number 5, or excuse me, verse number 4. Let's read verse number 4 and 5 again. It reads as follows. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "This is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, and now she is pregnant, and she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me." So we have this big mess now. There's a new marriage, there's a new baby, there's a pregnancy, and we have this big, huge mess. Now, the first things first is when Hagar got pregnant, she shouldn't have treated Sarah with contempt. So we all probably know what happened. Hagar gets pregnant. She starts to look at Sarah like, hey, I'm on the same level as you now. I'm probably on an even higher level because I can conceive, which was wrong, okay? She shouldn't have treated Sarah harshly because Sarah was still in a leadership role. She was the original wife, okay? She was the wife that was loved. So Hagar should not have treated Sarah this way. Now she may have had some resentment, which was justified. She was forced into a marriage. She was forced to become a mother, but she shouldn't have been treated this way, or she shouldn't have treated Sarah this way. The resentment was justified, but she shouldn't have treated Sarah this way. Now, Sarai concocts a plan. It backfires on her, and she starts to treat Hagar harshly. She starts to treat her in a rude fashion. She starts to treat her badly, very badly, okay? Think of you, if there are ladies listening to this right now. Think of you, if you were in this position and you leased out your husband to another woman to have a baby, to get pregnant and have a baby, and she started gloating, how would you respond? Probably in a similar fashion as Sarah. Probably in a very similar fashion. So Hagar runs away from home. She runs away from her comfort and her safety, and she goes into the desert. And in the desert, she settles by a spring. She's pregnant. She settles by a spring. I'm sure she's tired and hungry and thirsty. And God meets her by this spring. And we have this interesting, almost dramatic interaction between the Lord and Hagar. It's interesting that the Lord visits Sarah, he visits Abram, and he visits Hagar. He visits her alone, and we often find that God visits us alone. Now, she's in the desert, another place where God visits us, an empty place, a desert like place. This is all metaphorical terminology that we can use in the present day. And Hagar settles by a spring. She meets the Lord by a spring, and we know that water is typically used as a metaphor to describe the Holy Spirit or God. Okay, God talks to Hagar about this bad situation. He also calls Hagar um, a servant of Sarai, so he does not dismiss the fact that she's a servant. Okay, when they have this discussion, God tells Hagar to go back to the bad situation she was forced to be in, to go back and submit under the difficult situation she was in. And he also gives her a promise, a wonderful promise, and says that she will have an abundance of children, right? She will have tons of seed, as they say in the Bible or in olden times, which is a blessing. Children are a blessing. So we have Hagar is in a situation where there's good here and there's bad, right? When we look at a field, there's if you're growing crops, there is your harvest and there are weeds and pests and different things, thieves that can take your harvest. So Hagar's in a situation where there's a lot of bad. She's forced into a situation to become a wife. She's forced to have a baby. The person who's in a leadership position over her is treating her harshly. All those things are bad. At the same time, she has a lot of blessings. She has a child, and God says she will be blessed greatly with even more children, an abundance of children. So she has both sides. Okay? Now, it's interesting that God tells her to go back and submit to her leader. Go back to and be a servant and submit to Sarai, even though she's being treated harshly. Now let's break that down. Why would God say that? Well, it's better than being in the desert where you're hungry and thirsty and probably will die. Okay. So there was food there was housing, there was water, there was money, there was substance. And let's not forget, Hagar, you are pregnant, so you need help. There are people there that can help you. In Abram's house, there were multiple servants, there was land, there was food, there was water, there was money. That is much better, much better than being out in the desert alone. So sometimes God tells us, even myself, he's told me to do this multiple times on multiple occasions. He tells us to go back and submit. Go back and submit. Go back to a location, whether it's a job, whether it's a house, whatever it may be, a certain relationship that you are not excited about. But that is where the housing is, the food is, the servants are, the water is, your help is, your sustenance is. That's where God has provided for you. For a certain time period, God has provided for you in that location. And if you want your provision, you're going to have to go back to the location God has provided for you, and you have to be obedient, not just to God, but probably to a person that you may not have such a great relationship with, okay? And sometimes this is the case. Now, is it very comfortable? No, but it is teaching us something, okay? In this situation, God teaches us something. God teaches us how to be respectful. God teaches us through our pain how to have compassion for yourself and others. God teaches us empathy for ourselves and others. And more than anything, I think God is teaching us, training us in obedience, which is so important in life. And we know the Bible says that God likes obedience over sacrifice, right? Some people give tithes or offerings in church today. God wants our obedience or over our monetary sacrifice, okay? Moving forward, I want to jump back to Abraham and Sarai. Let's jump back to Abram and Sarai. They were impatient, and it led to a lot of drama and problems in their marriages. Okay? They were being impatient, and it led to a lot of drama and problems in their marriage. Just think, if they were more patient and they were obedient, it seems like everyone is being taught obedience here. Hagar's being taught obedience and going back to to live under Sarai, and Abram and Sarai are being taught obedience in that they wouldn't have had these problems in their marriage. They wouldn't have had this extra drama in their marriage if they would have been patient and they would have trusted in God and trusted that they would have produced an heir. Okay. Now, I specifically want to talk to the men for a second here. The Bible tells us that Abram listened to the voice of his wife. Now, when I read this during my study, I learned that Abram listened to the voice of his wife and something negative happened. And when we also turn back to Genesis, I believe it's chapter 3, Adam listens to the voice of his wife Eve and something negative happens again. Now, gentlemen, it's good to listen to our wife if they're saying something holy, if they're saying something positive, if they're saying something that glorifies God or honors God. But in these situations, Adam listened to Eve and Abram listened to Sarai. When they listened to their wife in these situations, it brought a huge downfall. It brought a lot of problems and drama into their marriage. Okay? In this situation, Abram doesn't seem very masculine here. He seems very passive. He just does anything his wife Sarah asks him to do. He doesn't stand up. He isn't very manly in this position. The first time, Sarah concocts a plan and says, "Hey, go sleep with my servant." Wouldn't it occur to Abram to say, "Hey, honey, I don't think this is the best plan. I don't think this is the way to do this. Let's think about this." Nope. Instead, he says, sure enough, honey, I'll go into Hagar. I'll have relations with this young, beautiful woman. No problem at all. He sort of just bends like a wimp. He's not masculine here. He isn't assertive. He's very passive during this text, during this passage, Genesis chapter 16. And then after having relations with this woman and Hagar becoming his wife, Sarah is angry and kicks her out the house, basically pushes her away to leave. Now, isn't it interesting that once again, Abram doesn't stand up and say, "Hey, honey, this is wrong. This isn't holy. This isn't just. We aren't treating this woman fairly." No, he just complies. He, again, not very masculine, very effeminate, very passive. He says, "Do whatever you want. Honey, do whatever you want." And in verse 7 of chapter 16, we see Hagar running off into the wilderness alone. But what is beautiful in this pain and this tragedy, in this discomfort, is that God visits her in the wilderness, in the desert, by a spring, and gives her a promise. And we can see that when we are in our painful moments, when we have these times where we're alone, we know that God still cares for us. He can visit us, and He can give us a promise. I'm very happy to see, read, and learn from this, study from this section, because we all know that Hagar was put in a very compromising position. She didn't ask for a husband. She was forced into marriage, and she didn't ask for a baby. She was forced into motherhood. So it tells me that when we are in positions, or me personally, when I'm in positions that I don't like, positions that I feel forced in, positions that I don't feel are fair, God sees and God rewards us for being obedient. And God rewarded Hagar with children, loads of children, an abundance of children for the good she did. And having children, just like it is today, back in those times was a huge blessing. It was a huge gift. It was great. And last few things before we close here. Sometimes I hear about this argument that women have no power, and I think this is totally false. Sarah created a plan. She was the brainchild of this plan. She concocted a plan, and she convinced her husband to follow the plan. She brought the woman to the man, then she put her out. That sounds like a lot of power to me. I'm going to say that again. Sarah created a plan. She influenced her husband. She convinced her husband to follow her plan. Then she brought her servant to her husband. A baby was conceived. Then she put the woman out of her house, out of her land. Okay. This is a huge amount of power. Sarai is quite impressive in her thinking, in her wielding of power, in everything. She seems like a very impressive woman. So this argument that I hear sometimes that women have no power and that women are always victims, I just don't agree. Okay, I just don't agree. Now, we will not go over the next chapter immediately, but I will say this. Hagar spends the next 13 years of her life in a miserable home. Okay? She spends the next 13 years of her life in a miserable home. But again, I must say that when we are in compromising positions, when we are in difficult times, I think we have to look very closely and see that when we are being mistreated, God sees us and God takes note, okay? In these situations, we can take this opportunity to become a more compassionate person, a more kind person. We can learn our boundaries. When we experience these pains, we can learn to treat other people in similar situations a different way. And when God brings us out of these situations, there are so many lessons we have, lessons we've learned, and we can, if we look at them in the best way, and we forgive and we build ourselves as a person, we can take these experiences and they can help shape us into a much, much, much better person.